what I am really concerned about and really want medical students to understand is diving deep and understanding mechanisms is really key to being a good physician, not just to inform the practice, because I know there's protocols and things that help us to apply what we know, so we don't need to understand every mechanism to prescribe every drug, but even just patient education, right? If you as a doctor don't understand what you're doing, how can you answer your patient's questions, especially when the pandemic hits and everybody has questions about, is this vaccine safe? Is COVID really gonna harm me?
Welcome to Evening Rounds, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes in medicine. My name is Dr. Anthony Hilliard, and tonight I am joined by Dr. Daniel Rogstad. His role as an infectious disease expert has never been more relevant than during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to his clinical duties, he has taken on the personal responsibility to educate our community and dispel misinformation surrounding the pandemic. If you like what you hear tonight, please subscribe. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on to our Evening Rounds podcast.
Absolutely.
It's great to have another internist on the show this evening. I haven't had an opportunity to thank you for your Christmas gift.
You're welcome.
It's actually a gift I've used quite a bit. Cool. My office is not too far from here, and if you were to go into my CD player on my computer, you would find your Christmas CD.
Wow.
I've known you as a man of many talents, and we'll talk about some of those. What I did not know was the fantastic musician that you are. Your piano performances on the renditions of the Christmas songs is just remarkable. Where did you get that passion and that skill set to do something like what you provided the Department of Medicine?
Yeah, good question. So I really have been sort of in love with music and classical music most of all. Even before I was born, I was the youngest in my family, and all my older siblings and my dad and my mom were all classical music aficionados. So I know they played a bunch of stuff even before I was born. And then, even at age 2, I was saying words like Tchaikovsky and things like that, and identifying composers.
Wow. I'm not sure I say that many syllable words to this day, but
and maybe 2 is too young. I don't know. I'm ad-libbing here, but I was sort of raised in that, sort of saturated in that environment, and started playing by ear probably around age 5 or 6, learning even some classical pieces by ear, and then started taking formal lessons at 8. Took lessons till I was about 23, 24, and then just, have done a whole lot of different things with music throughout. I even considered going into music at one point.
Why didn't you?
Yeah, very briefly, my dad told me, something to the effect of, you can do medicine and music on the side. You're not going to be able to do music and a little medicine on the side. That's just not going to be working. So I had obviously interest in science and medicine, and if I had gone into music solely, I would have been basically throwing out a huge portion of my life and what I was interested in and what I was passionate about and good at. So I feel like I have the best mix that I could have had in this life, and being able to still do a lot of music things on the side and be a practicing physician.
It sounds like in your family, you had an incredibly talented family. Lots of scientists and nurses, and obviously a love for music.
Yeah.
How has that shaped who you are today?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I love my family. I just love hanging out and talking with them and getting off track, but COVID has killed that, and I hate it. I'm going to be glad when COVID's over, if it ever gets over. But I think the aspect of music, all of us love music so much, and yet all of us have different sorts of careers and other things that we do. None of us went into music. So just the appreciation for loving hobbies and having a balanced life, I think that's really important, because medicine, you can be really unbalanced. but to have a hobby that you really enjoy so much and can pour into so much into and just escape from your job, I think is so important. It's helped kept me really balanced and whole in a way. So
You're a physician. Are there other physicians in the family, or what careers do they hold?
yeah, so two of my uncles were surgeons. One of the uncles he passed away a number of years ago, but he was a general surgeon and pioneered a lot of general surgery techniques, sort of in the days when general surgery meant really general, like they could do almost everything. And then an orthopedic surgeon is another uncle. He's still living and he's retired. And then my mom and my sister are both nurses. My sister still is practicing. She's a hospice nurse, and that's a real passion of hers.
What about your father?
My dad and my brothers are all engineers, physicists, engineers, so electrical engineers.
Yeah.
And you didn't want to go into that?
I sort of did. I sort of wanted to do both. My dad himself went to Caltech and did an undergraduate degree in physics and a PhD in physics there, and even would have lunch with Richard Feynman on a weekly basis. It was in those days. So I had that in my mind. I got into Caltech too. I went, and I was thinking, I'll be a physics major and a pre-med, and I realized after about 2 days that wasn't going to work.
So my family, we talk about sport, trading football cards and baseball cards. I'm being a little facetious, but you probably drew equations on walls or things like that.
Exactly. So yeah, my dad would have, we had a blackboard with chalk, but then it turned into a whiteboard at the dinner table. And anytime one of my brothers had some sort of question, he'd get up and start drawing the equations out for the
No way.
Yeah, I'm feeling small right now.
Maxwell's equations up. So I, obviously I wanted to take part in this, and that's why I wanted to go into physics. But then I realized that was not the direction I needed to go.
As a father, are you kind of doing some of these things with your kids too?
Definitely don't do equations. But it's interesting. Me and my wife have such similar jobs in a sense. We're both teachers. I teach in the medical school. She teaches, has taught a lot of different grades, but right now is currently a physical sciences, 8th grade physical sciences teacher. And so we have lots of nerdy conversations all the time.
Nice.
Dinner table, any other time. And the kids I'm sure they see that we love bantering back and forth about science and education.
You're a man of faith. I'd like to hear how faith has impacted you. And the reason why I bring that up is you're also a man of science. You're an MD, PhD, and we'll talk a little bit about that career path. But the world of basic science is often a secular world, not universally so. But as a man who has deep faith, I'd like to hear your perspectives on that and what sort of challenges you faced wrestling with sometimes competing philosophies in certain circles.
Yeah, that's such a good question, and there's so many things that one could say about this. I grew up never thinking that I had to separate my faith from science and from my interest in science. My dad and brothers were definitely, and a whole family were definitely instrumental in this, in the sense that they felt that a true understanding of science and its interpretation is not at all incompatible with the biblical faith. And the way I view it is God created the world. He created a set of natural laws that that we as humans can figure out. We do science, we investigate, and we find out, and we understand. And he also wrote the Bible, and these two are two different accounts of truth in a sense, and they should agree, and we don't need to keep them in separate and say one is over here and the other is here and that they can't mix. And so I look at them holistically. I think that sometimes if there's an apparent disagreement between the two, that it's not always science that's wrong. It's not always religion or biblical interpretation that's wrong. It might be either one. And we should have humility on both sides and try to understand which part are we not getting right. And I think if both sides had more humility, there could be harmony between them all the time. Or there's times where we just don't understand one or the other side.
Boy, you could take the concept of if there was just a little more humility everywhere, there may be more harmony universally.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I feel like we've seen a lot of discourse with, specifically, as you mentioned before, the pandemic.
Yeah.
How is the pandemic kind of been a teaching moment for you, and how is it shaping what you're doing now with your students?
Yeah, so I'm one of my roles too, in the medical school is being assistant dean for basic science education, and it's sort of like being the principal of the first 2 years of medical school, although there's still somebody above me as well. But and what I am really concerned about and really want medical students to understand is diving deep and understanding mechanisms and is really key to being a good physician, not just to inform the practice, because I know there's protocols and things that help us to apply what we know. So we don't need to understand every mechanism to prescribe every drug, but even just patient education, right? If you as a doctor don't understand what you're doing, how can you answer your patient's questions, especially when the pandemic hits and everybody has questions about, is this vaccine safe? Is COVID really going to harm me? So many questions that can be answered. Even if we don't have all the information, it can be answered by looking up sources and giving a temporary answer, and we know as time goes on, we know more and more about COVID. And I feel that the public misunderstands science in the sense that when something comes out, and usually the media brings it out, right? This is our working knowledge right now, and the evidence might be poor, but that doesn't get communicated, right? There's a hierarchy of evidence we as physicians are taught about, but that's lost on the public. And so if some science comes out and then the reverse comes out later, then it's just confusion, and the public is not trusting of medicine or science anymore, even though we as physicians realize, well, it was poor evidence before, and now we have better evidence, and it's actually the reverse decision. So if I can even get medical students to just wrestle with that instead of just trying to memorize everything, then I'd be really happy. And that's what we're kind of working on.
You have an awesome responsibility. I, as a physician who went through medical school, and as many of all of our colleagues did, right? We know that the first 2 years of medical school are crucial. Yeah. You are the principal, so to speak, or the academic advisor and the mentor and all these things to a whole host of students. What do you think, and maybe not just in the medical profession, but what do you see as the greatest challenges facing our learners today?
There's so much information at our fingertips. That was not true decades ago when, as long as you had these few textbooks, you could kind of learn all the medical knowledge that was there. I mean, this was, but as time has gone on, medical knowledge has just exploded, so that really the problem is not finding the knowledge. It's really internalizing it and understanding so that you can apply to new situations. I think that's the biggest challenge now is, how do we even teach, right? Do we just throw information at people and hope that it sticks? And I think our answer more and more is no. We need to ensure that students are internalizing it and becoming self-directed learners or directed self-learners or whatever you want to call it. I think that's kind of the biggest challenge is how do you transform somebody who's just good at consuming a lot of information and really getting them to apply that information and have a deep sense of how the human body works.
Do you think that's like the social media conundrum that we've caused of just too much information?
That definitely. And then also, and I even see this in myself, is the ability to concentrate everybody's ability to concentrate, I feel like, is going down with the short sound bites that we have that we can read quickly and feed ourselves upon. So, the ability to sit down and read several pages of a textbook and understand, I feel like that's being lost. And even reading textbooks at all is being lost. And I'm not happy about it. And it's true of myself too. I can sense that's happening to everybody. But yeah, it's a challenge.
There's probably been no greater popularity for an infectious disease specialist than over the last year, probably since TB and then HIV. As I think about sort of the peaks of being an infectious disease specialist, popularity has their perks, but it also has associated with it a lot of negativity, right? The demands placed on infectious disease physicians, whether it be on increased patient loads, whether it be on the stress of continuous exposure, whether it be how to wrestle with what do you do when you get home and you see your loved ones who are who have not been exposed, presumably, or at least known exposures like you certainly have and your colleagues have as well. And there's been other specialties too, but I reflect on it as a cardiologist that would see a few patients with COVID-related heart problems, but I think about the strain, the mental strain, the physical strain that COVID has put on our healthcare providers and, from a physician's perspective, our infectious disease specialists. I don't know if you care to comment on how that's impacted you and your colleagues.
Yeah, I will just say, because of the percent that I work in the infectious disease division, I don't have it nearly as difficult as my colleagues do. So I'm 20%, which ends up being 2 half days a week. Usually I do consults or a clinic or something like that, because of most of my time spent in the medical school. So I will say that I don't have it nearly as difficult as my colleagues, and our division recently flowered, and we've hired many new physicians to take the workload, which has been a really important time in COVID for sure. But I definitely see in my colleagues, the difficulty of seeing 40-year-olds with kids, or women who just gave birth, mm-hmm. and they're in the ICU and they're either not doing well or they're, very close to passing away. Seeing that repeatedly, it wears you down, and it's very discouraging. And I especially think of our ICU physicians who had to deal, especially during that difficult time in December and January, where had so many patients dying per day. It's very difficult. I think for me, it's been more challenging on the educational side. Mm. So there have been at least 3 instances, maybe more, of videos being sent to me, usually by family members or friends, that are usually videos done by doctors who I completely disagree with, and they'll ask me, "What do you think of this?" And there's all these different COVID things that I don't agree with, and what I've done in each of those cases is sit down, take a day or 2 or more, and listen to it, and then write a rebuttal and look in the literature. And so that has been exhausting, mm-hmm. and I feel like I need to do more because there's so much misinformation out there. But I think that I didn't used to do things like that, where I'd get all these things sent to me, and I feel personally responsible to respond to this, even if I'm super busy with work. No, I have to lay aside work right now. I have to take my day off and respond to this. And that's been definitely a burden, but I think one that I'm very willing to take on.
Yeah, it's been really nice to be able, from the PR side of things, to be able to have kind of your voice in the conversation and be able to dispel some of those myths, because that's what we're seeing popping up just overwhelmingly since this all began. So it's really incredible that you can have that voice, and that you can also be working to teach, the future generations, to have that same voice of reason. And
I think it isn't just I'm spending that one day reading or whatever. It's usually I wake up every morning, and I have a daily digest from the IDSA that goes through basically all the recent articles and papers. And I don't read all the articles and papers, but I read the digest, and just constantly trying to keep up on what the new data and what the new understanding and the new, objections and what the science is behind them. So it's really it's kind of I feel like an all-consuming thing. And sometimes I feel I need a break from that too.
So on that note, when you feel like you need a break, what do you do?
Well, going back to music.
Okay.
I almost every night I'll play, and it's not always classical now. I've been doing my own sort of improvisations and compositions. So I actually will. I'm working on another CD. It's almost ready, but it's just original compositions. I'm going to call it Reflections on Grace, and kind of each one of them will have like a one-word name. Just sort of thoughts, and just it almost is like a processing of what's happened in the last year with COVID and the church and all the craziness, and what can we can come back to that Jesus is real, God is real, He's in control, He has us where He wants us, and I feel like that can center us. I also listen a lot. I listen to a lot of classical music. In the last 2 years or so, CDs have gotten really cheap, like $1 a CD.
I was impressed that you're even making a CD. And do we still have CD players?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So you can purchase, for instance, all of like the complete Bach music set or the complete Beethoven music set. And I've done a few of those purchases, and this year I'm listening to all of Beethoven.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
It's Beethoven 2020 is the set. It's like 123 CDs or something.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm on number 44 or 45 right now. So
do they go by timeline or by type of music, like sonatas and then concertos, or what?
yeah, for Beethoven, it's by type of music. So all his symphonic stuff was up front. And so I've went through that, and I'm in the middle of the sonatas right now. For other composers, sometimes they go by timeline. So
Yeah. It's not a number 5. It's a pretty good one. Emperor.
yeah, definitely.
Your neighbors must be so blessed when they walk by your house and hear you playing, or they must really love that.
I hope the next door neighbors are like, oh, piano again.
I'm sure they love it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a nice probably getaway for you, but it's also probably really lovely for them. Infectious disease is a big part of your life, obviously. I've heard tale that you had an encounter on your honeymoon, in fact, with an infectious disease. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that may have been one of the reasons I went into infectious disease. So
Really?
It was, I got married just a few months before I started medical school to my wife, Katie, who we had gone to college together, and we'd worked in the same research lab together. So we were really good friends. But we went to Mammoth for 11 days in a cabin. And it was like late May, early June. So it's kind of when there's a lot of waters turning from ice to water, and there's, new rivers getting in the middle of trails, and the trails aren't as well kept as they should be. And I crossed one of these rivers in the middle of the trail where I kind of went through some brush, and my wife didn't. She took a safer route. But in the end, when we got back, she noticed I had 2 ticks in my back. And she pulled them out with a tweezer. I said, we need to save those, put them in a baggie, just in case. And
Forever the scientist.
that's right. And I knew, even though I hadn't been in medical school yet, I knew that I could, contract a tick-borne illness. And so I went to the Mammoth bookstore and pulled out a book and just was reading some of the symptoms. So, okay, all right, I'm ready for it. Totally fine the whole trip. Came back, was staying with my in-laws before we went back home overnight, and I just had drenching night sweats and fevers. Wow. and kind of have those, fever dream experiences where you're not feeling well and you don't know what's going on. So
don't tell me what it is. I want to try to take a guess.
Okay.
Actually, this is an effort in futility. Endemic to this area. It's not. I only know one, Rocky Mountain. What else is there?
Yeah, well, so I never got a 100% answer, but I did have the classic rash. It was macular. It turned petechial. It was on the palms. And
So when you say that, you mean you had small
at first
rash.
It was kind of like larger rash on the arms and the hands, and then it got really tiny, which is the pathophysiology is it's a vasculitis basically. The infectious disease sets up a reaction there and attacks your blood vessels. So drove back to Loma Linda, went to the urgent care. I told them what was going on. They gave me doxycycline, which, if we hadn't known about the tick, this would have been hard to figure out.
Did you show them your baggie of ticks?
I unfortunately threw it away. I might have shown them, but I don't think I kept it long term to say, who are you going to send it to, right?
Yeah.
CDC is not going to be interested. Yeah. And it was really a whole week of symptoms, even though I was on medicine appropriate and my LFTs went up and liver enzyme tests, but eventually it got better. And then, reading about it, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, if you don't catch it early, can be life-threatening. Yeah. So very, very fortunate. And
you get disseminated intravascular coagulation, all sorts of things.
That's a $10 word.
Yeah, it's like it's where your body clots and bleeds at the same time.
Oh, man.
Yeah, multi-organ failure, everything. So I am very thankful for that experience. I then was definitely interested in infectious diseases all the way through, but still was interested in hematology oncology because of the research I was doing in the basic science lab that I was involved in. So those were kind of the two, and in the end, infectious disease won out.
So having had this happen to you, how has that kind of colored how you see infectious disease and how you teach?
Yeah, good question. In a couple different ways. One, in a way that maybe isn't so good and I have to be careful of, because I am always looking out for zebras. And what I mean by that is I'm looking sometimes for infections that are uncommon but I don't want to miss, right? And sometimes I may be too focused on the rare things. And so I have to watch that in myself. Well, this guy might have Rocky Mountain spotted fever because I did. And if I hadn't caught me, then I wouldn't be here today, right? So in another sense, though, that's sort of what infectious disease is about. You have to be on board with understanding there can be zebras out there. And if you don't entertain the rare things, then you are going to miss things that you can really help your colleagues diagnosing. And when I teach, this is usually then the upper third and fourth year medical students and residents, I teach them to, if they're concerned or if they're not sure about a rare disease when somebody is super sick in the ICU, then they should add a drug like doxycycline, which covers so many of those rare infectious disease problems and it's relatively safe to use.
Well, I can tell you, if I'm a patient and you're seeing me, I appreciate you thinking about the rare things. I will have to say, the internist in me, as a cardiologist and board certified in internal medicine, we always refer to the infectious disease physicians as the internist's internist. And it's because of that. It's the consults from infectious disease are notoriously extraordinarily detailed. And it's because of their perspectives on the world. They are often consulted when things don't make sense, when there may be an infection, but we can't figure it out. They are the Sherlock Holmes in every physician. So I can't thank you guys enough when I order an infectious disease consult, I'm putting up the white flag asking for help. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's honestly a lot of fun too, right? To be thinking of all these different things. I mean, there's a reason all of us went into infectious disease, and it's nice when our job fits with just us having fun too.
Yeah.
I think you're in the right field when you can say that infectious disease is fun.
Absolutely.
wanted to follow up just briefly on your basic science training. So becoming a physician, getting an MD degree or a DO degree is difficult in and of itself. I remember a couple of our classmates who I'd never met before walked on the graduation lawn the Sunday morning, and I was like, "Oh, you're in our class." Well, they were PhD students that had come back into school. It's a long road. The medical training plus residency plus fellowship is a long training. I can't imagine adding a PhD to that. So I'd like to hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time. I originally did not intend to do both a PhD and MD, but I think my background, the scientific interest, going to Caltech, where I had done 3 years of research in a virology lab, more like 3 summers, because you don't work much during the year in a tough program. I think it was meant to be. I initially was applied to just a few schools in medical school, and I didn't get in, and I think that was a good thing, because then what I ended up doing is working at the City of Hope Cancer Research Center for a year, and really fell in love with investigation, basic science investigation, and was very successful with that. And then the person whose lab I was in actually moved his whole lab to Loma Linda. It was Larry Sowers, and I feel like the time in his lab really taught me to think deeply. And I would not have had the chance and the opportunity to think so deeply in one aspect, one area of medicine. And at the time it was basically DNA damage, DNA repair, which is so critical to a lot of different, particularly in cancer, but in other areas of medicine too.
What do you mean by DNA damage for our listeners?
Yeah, DNA damage and repair. So what I don't think many people realize is our DNA will get damaged 10 to 100,000 times per cell per day.
What does our DNA do? You got to break it down for us.
This is basically our genetic code, our human blueprint, the instructions with which you can make all the different motors and mechanisms and machines that our body can uses to operate and to work. So the DNA, you want it to be faithful. You want it to be a faithful code. When something gets changed in the DNA, then all the cells that come from that cell afterwards are going to be changed too. And this is essentially, DNA damage is a mechanism by which cancer comes about. A cell that has lost its control, has lost its ability to regulate itself, and now is growing too fast and is causing a cancer. So 10 to 100,000 times per day per cell, there are insults from outside the body, from inside the body, oxygen, water, radiation, other things. And our body deals with that with the amazing complex DNA repair machines that are built in. And there's so many different overlapping ones. If one of them gets shut down, usually there's one or two others that can compensate and take over. But slowly over time, over a lifetime, several of them get out of place, and then that's why you get cancers later in life, is because your repair mechanisms are failing and getting fewer and fewer. So fascinating stuff.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So the math, I was not a math major, but the trillions of cells that we have, each of them having that many insults, that's a big number for the body to be relatively perfect most of the time.
That's right. And we see the consequences of losing just one repair machinery mechanism. So one example is a disease called xeroderma pigmentosum. This is a genetic disease where you're missing one type of DNA repair mechanism, a nucleotide excision repair mechanism. And these kids tend to get skin cancers by age 10 and just they just can't handle the sun because the repair mechanism that fixes UV damage to DNA is missing. And so they usually will die, in their teens or earlier of some related mechanism to skin cancers or other things like that. So that's an example of if we're missing this very important mechanism. Some mechanisms, if you're missing them, you may not ever even make it out of the embryo stage. It's just embryonic lethal.
Boy, it puts things into perspective the days that you feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how many years, just for your own career, how many years after college were you trained, studied, etc.?
After college, before residency or?
Yeah, the whole thing after college.
So that's 9 years, but then there's 6 years of residency and fellowship. So that's 15 years before you get a real job.
Yeah.
That is incredible. That is a commitment to learning.
Do you find that being a clinical practitioner makes you a better educator?
Absolutely. I think, there have been times where I was even thinking, should I even do this much clinical? I feel so overwhelmed. It's too much. This was short periods of time I felt that way. And I keep coming back to, I need at least 2 half days a week to stay in the clinical. And I do we'll do a weekend call where you just get a nice bolus of lots of infectious disease cases and you're the one person on for the weekend. So I think that's such an important thing. If I were not seeing patients at all, I think I would quickly lose my, being in touch with students and what they're going to have to do in residence and physicians. So definitely extremely important.
Yeah. You've probably seen a lot, but is there anything that you see repeatedly that isn't too scary that is fascinating to you in the infectious disease world?
There is definitely a lot of things. I think just in my recent focus on coccidioides infections and fungal infections in general, I think it's both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. One specific disease is meningitis with coccidioides. It's essentially, once it gets into the brain and the spinal cord, it cannot be cured or very hard to cure.
And so how does it get in?
It's kind of like TB. Somebody will inhale the spores. They don't know they're inhaling it. It's in California, and for some reason, 2/3 of people will inhale it, and they might have an infection, never know they have an infection, and they're fine. But if somebody has something wrong with their immune system or they got a huge dose of it, then they could either get a severe pneumonia or in less than 1% of cases, it'll get into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier somehow, and get into the brain and spinal cord. And that's the most devastating complication.
Well, that doesn't make me want to get up and go on a run in the morning. I can tell you that. Yeah. Thanks a lot for that.
You're welcome.
So this has been a fascinating interview. It gives me a whole new respect for the human body. Even as a practicing physician, sometimes I like to focus on what's wrong with it. But when you think about it, most of it's doing pretty darn well. Our Evening Rounds podcast was a name we reflected on for some time, trying to impart what the meaning of Evening Rounds is, I think is very different for different physicians. It means something to me for sure, and I'm sure it means something to you. I would like to hear from your perspective, when you hear the term Evening Rounds, what does it mean to you?
Well, the first thing I think of is doing rounds at later. It's usually a second kind of rounds to patients. It's, almost in some ways more care involved because it's you don't have to necessarily come back the second time to see a patient, and a lot of us don't. But if a physician comes back to check on a patient they're worried about a second time, that shows extra care and extra concern. And I feel like Loma Linda just embodies care and concern for patients. I mean, that's in some ways that's why I'm here is the extra love of what we do and love for fellow human beings and love for God really drives us. So I love the phrase Evening Rounds. It kind of makes me think of all those things.
Well, wonderful. I can't wait for Reflections on Grace. to fill my evenings with peace and tranquility. So, but again, I just thank you for taking the time out this evening, sharing your story.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.